Welcome to NatRevMD, a podcast where we share tips on optimizing medical billing and improving practice efficiency so you can have the business of your dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Signorelli, founder of NatRevMD. Let's get started. All right, did you guys know that up to 30% of denials in private practices come from one single mistake, and that's eligibility errors? So this is something that should take your front desk, anywhere from less than a minute to several minutes, maybe a little bit longer if they're having to reconnect with patients. But in general, it should not take that long for the majority of your patients, but it is costing practices tens of thousands of dollars every year. Welcome to the NatRevMD Podcast. So this week, you guess it, we are going to talk all about eligibility because it is the number one mistake that we see with practices. Typically, this is handled by your front desk, but we see the denials on our end from a billing perspective. And so we're working with practices, putting these on issue trackers to help resolve. But the better we can get and the better you can get at managing your front desk and having them understand the ways to optimize eligibility, the better your revenue will be. Especially because if these don't get fixed quickly enough, or if they're fixed and the patient doesn't have active coverage, you may have missed the opportunity to collect at all, especially if there's a patient responsibility or an out-of-network issue. So today we're going to talk all about this. I know it sounds super basic. I know I've talked about it in the past, but we're restructuring this around those top things that we see practices doing wrong when it comes to eligibility. And it's truly one of the fastest way you can protect your revenue. Again, I always say, billing starts the moment that patient calls the front desk to schedule an appointment. And so this is really, really important. So we're going to go through the reasons. We're going to talk about some of the simple fixes and help provide options for you guys to implement into your practice even as early as this week. All right. Reason number one, that eligibility is not working. So this is really just not doing eligibility at all, right? Let's start there. Let's start with the simple part, right? It might surprise you, but we still see practices that skip eligibility checks, or maybe they're only checking them once a year and they're not checking them with every visit. So I really, really want to underscore the importance of checking insurance eligibility every single visit. Make sure that they are handing over an insurance card so that you are physically seeing it as well when that patient checks in. So you're doing an eligibility check ahead of the patient's scheduled visit. You're doing that within the clearinghouse or practice management software. You are also verifying copays, deductibles, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute. And then you're physically seeing the insurance card when the patient comes in. And you're also making sure, and again, asking them, do you have any other insurance, right? Do you have a secondary? Do you have multiple insurances? Because we'll talk a little bit about coordination of benefits and how multiple insurances may make it tricky when it comes to who you should bill first. So obviously we know the problem, right? Insurances change constantly, patients change jobs, employers switch carriers, and also plans reset. And so if you're not checking eligibility before every single visit, you may not find out that that insurance was inactive until the claim is denied 30 to 45 days later. And at that point, the patient's gone, the visit has happened. Maybe you weren't in network at all with their new plan. Maybe the patient wasn't covered at all. So you've missed that opportunity to collect a patient responsibility or something due by the patient from a cash pay visit. And then you get into concerns with the No Surprises Act and making sure that they are aware that they're out of network ahead of time. So huge issue. Really, the biggest fix around this is just setting in stone the time period by which you're going to expect staff to do eligibility checks, making sure they know it's non-negotiable, making sure that every patient scheduled for the next day has already been verified, patients have been contacted, issues resolved. And we'll talk about all of these in detail here in a minute. So I really want to also underscore, and if you missed Marissa's episode, she was an office manager, is an office manager of a practice that we do billing for. And she was on the podcast last week and talked about her process around this and how important it was. And one of the things that I took away was that she scheduled time for a front office staff member to sit and have dedicated time to manage the eligibility issue. And the main reason for this is it's really not something you can just squeeze in between phone calls. You really need to have a dedicated, time that you're doing this eligibility checks, whether that's somebody else having to cover the phones or the front desk, but really having somebody have dedicated time to make sure that all of the checks are done, the patient balances and copays and all of the stuff you need to collect are recorded and ready for when the patient comes in and any eligibility issues are resolved. Ideally, this is happening, a couple days ahead of time so that you can resolve them if there are issues, and that you have, again, an accountability checklist or something that says, Sarah is going to sit and do this, Monday afternoons from 2 to 4, and, Susie's going to cover the phones. I mean, something in a process for every single day of the week, depending on your scheduling and the individuals that can help with this. Obviously, this can also be done by a virtual assistant. So if that individual is able to do this offline and communicate that with a front desk staff member, that's also something that can work. I have found it's better to have, if it is going to be a VA, it's better to have a situation where that VA can also contact patients so they can do the whole process that is necessary for checking that eligibility. All right, reason number 2 that eligibility fails or we have issues in eligibility and denials is that staff will stop at active when it comes to an eligibility check, meaning you're going into a practice management software, you are working in a clearinghouse, wherever you're checking eligibility, and coverage says it's active, right? You get like a little green triangle, a green check mark, depending on your software, and it says active. Okay, great. But then you have to go a step further and really make sure that the staff member who's doing this understands how to read the insurance card, understands how to read which plan it is, and being able to go in when you're in the software, click into the information where it says active, and then actually confirm the plan, confirm that the patient or the practice is in network with that specific plan, confirm that the visit type is covered and that you don't need referral or authorization. And then it will also list out, copays, deductibles, coinsurance, all of that sort of information that you need in order to be able to understand what payments you need to collect before the patient is seen. And this is really, really important. I'll just mention, I know I've said this before, but with the deductible situation, right? If the patient has a deductible that hasn't been met, you will want to collect something. And I know it's very difficult to figure out how much to collect. So you can come up with an amount, a deposit amount, $50, $75, depending on what specialty you are, and say, okay, I'll collect that ahead of time. But I really, really caution that if you do this, you have to have a really strong refund process. Some states require that you to refund a patient within 30 days of understanding that there is a credit balance there. So really, really want to make sure you understand your state laws when it comes to refunds. And that if you are going to do these patient deposits, that you leave that amount unposted until the claim is adjudicated, understand if there's a patient credit due and refund that, or if there is a patient balance that then you can apply that deposit to. And again, you're not going to get it perfect. So this is where having that solid refund process is really key. Some softwares allow you to just push a button and the refunds go back to the patient's credit card. I'm a huge fan of that feature if you have that software. ModMed has that. I know that they're ones to have it, and we love that software. So check that out if you are in the process of kind of identifying new software that you need. So obviously, why this is important, right? So if you have a patient, say they have active coverage, but you are not in network with that product plan, then you really need to make sure you have a plan around letting the patients know that. Obviously, any sort of referrals that are common with HMOs or managed plans are going to be something you want to look at. If you are in a procedural practice and you need prior authorization, you're going to want to understand that. There's also sometimes carve-outs with regards to certain subspecialties. So you want to make sure if you are kind of in one of those carve-out subspecialties that you understand if a visit type is included or excluded in plan benefits. Some of that information you can get from the eligibility check. Sometimes you have to call and get that information. So just really, really want to make sure you have all of this in place. So again, highlight here is just making sure that when you are doing an eligibility check, the staff is not just stopping at it's active. They're actually going in, confirming the payer, confirming the plan, verifying that they're in network, looking at referral and authorization requirements, copays, deductibles, and then obviously documenting what they have found in the chart so that you have a plan for the next day or whenever the patient comes in to collect those balances, to discuss with them if they're out of network, or even a phone call ahead of time for those sort of issues is really, really important. You just really want to make sure that the entire process of this is taught to your front desk staff that you have a policy and procedure for this and a checklist so that they really understand every single time that they do eligibility, here are the things that they do. Now, we do have an eligibility checklist and guide that we have. I will put the link down in the show notes so that you guys can click on that and be able to download that for your front desk staff. All right, reason number 3. Ignoring inactive coverage. This is another fan favorite of mine. So obviously you're running eligibility, staff's running eligibility, and what will happen is you can push a button sometimes for your entire roster for a certain date to run eligibility through your PM software or clearinghouse. And I think where things can go wrong is if you push that button, but you don't actually go back and understand which patients showed as inactive and being able to resolve that. And so sometimes the assumption is, well, the patient gave me the wrong card. I will get the card when they check in. I really hesitate, or I really suggest, making sure that patients' eligibility issues are resolved before they even get into the office. A phone call to the patient asking if they gave the wrong card or if they have another insurance card or what could have happened. I heard a story actually about a patient whose insurance had been terminated by a small business and employer, and the patient didn't know it until the doctor's office started getting denied claims for the insurance. Tough situation, probably pretty rare, but again, the idea here is that you're always having the staff follow up on those inactive and getting those resolved. Because obviously, if you see a patient under inactive coverage, then you are in a situation where you haven't let them know. They may not have decided to come and see you. They may not be able to do cash pay, or you've missed the opportunity to tell them what your cash pay rates are and collecting that up front. And so really want to make sure that for those patients that you're checking eligibility, if it says inactive, that you need to have a plan around resolving, right? Which is going to the payer portals, calling the patient, checking to make sure that, they don't have another insurance information. And then obviously if they truly don't have active coverage, then you're going to have to talk with them about what that looks like for your practice from a cash pay perspective. So really important that, these steps are outlined for your staff and that they understand that. All right. Reason number 4 we see eligibility issues is overlooking the plan type. I sort of touched on this earlier, but we have started creating for our practices for basically a PowerPoint that is, when we see eligibility issues cropping up, we create a PowerPoint that shows pictures or cards of their insurance, and it actually gives the staff a way to read the insurance card because it's not always straightforward. So carriers like Blue Cross, United offer dozens of different products, right? PPO, HMO, EPO, Medicaid managed plans. And so being in network with one obviously doesn't mean that you're necessarily in network with the other. So you need to have a very clear outline of which payers you're in network with, which plans you're in network with, so that your front office staff can learn how to read these insurance cards, know that it's a Blue Cross plan, it's a PPO, and whether or not you're in network for that. Because again, the problem becomes that if they don't know how to read the insurance cards and they're not kind of resolving some of that network plan issues, that you may have missed an opportunity to capture cash pay or out of network fees ahead of time from a patient. And getting that after the fact is very difficult, plus challenging with the whole Good No Surprises Act. So really important to make sure that the front office staff know how to read the insurance cards, know how to verify the plan product, know how to understand in the eligibility check how to see which plan it is so that they can confirm that you are in network with that plan. So obviously just knowing Blue Cross isn't enough, and you have to get the details behind that. And we'll talk a little bit about more here in a minute about how applying that within your practice management software at the front desk is really important, and it impacts how claims are submitted to the payers. All right, reason number 5. We've got 7 of these, so hang on for a couple more. Skipping coordination of benefits. So patients with multiple insurances is one of the most common denial traps. We see this in some of our larger practices, especially those urgent cares, where someone may have coverage through, an employer or an IPA plan, and basically you have multiple insurance carriers, and you've got to figure out in the office which one is first, right? So which one of the insurances do you bill first? And so this is not always something the front office can see. It's not always something that you can tell in an eligibility check. It doesn't tell you like bill this one first, bill this one second. It sometimes may just say both of these are active and the office may need to call. Sometimes the patient actually has to call and coordinate the coordination of benefits and tell you which payer is first. And so really, really important that you are always asking your patients, do you have more than one insurance card? Confirming that, which plan may be primary. And then sometimes you can see that information in the payer portals. So if you do have patients with multiple insurance cards, trying the payer portals and see if you can glean information on which one is first or which one should be billed first. This is a huge issue because if you do have denials on this and you have coordination of benefit issues and those aren't resolved or you can't get a hold of the patient, you may struggle with timely filing denials, especially if these aren't something that, you and the office and the billing team are kind of coordinating and making sure. This is why for our practices, we put these on our issue trackers, which are reviewed weekly with our practices. So again, fix here is making sure you're asking, are there other insurance carriers that the patient may have? Do you have more than one insurance card? Collecting all those cards at check-in, doing eligibility on all the cards that they give you, and then really working with either the payer portals, calling the payer directly, or the patient, understand which plan is primary and secondary so that those can be updated in your PM software. Really important that in that PM software, you are designating which one's primary and secondary because it will determine how those claims are sent out, and you can result in denials if those aren't in the right order in the practice management software. Usually this is pretty clearly delineated in the software, so you're able to clearly say like primary or secondary, but really important to work with your billing team if that's not clear with your front desk. All right, reason number 6, missing subscriber or social security information. So some payers, especially government payers, actually won't touch your claim without the subscriber social security number. And so really want to make sure that you have that for those payers that you need. For example, TRICARE, some of the VA programs, Medicaid programs. And so really important that you have a process around which payers require social security information, grabbing that from your front desk and having that be something that they put into the system before the patient is seen so that those are then sent out clean and you're not having any issues of chasing those denials after. So simple one, but really, really important. All right, reason number 7, registering the insurance under the wrong payer profile. Really, really important. And actually, we see this happen, unfortunately, more than we would like. And there's no really easy way to do this other than just the staff really having to understand the plans that are on those insurance cards. So again, it comes back down to reading those insurance cards correctly and making sure that they understand which plan that goes to within the practice management software. So again, when they register the patient, they capture the insurance information. For example, Blue Cross isn't Blue Cross, right? So you have to know which plan it is so that you know which payer ID to attach it to in the PM software. Because if the claim is put onto the wrong payer ID, it's going to be sent and routed through the clearinghouse to the wrong payer, and you're again going to get that denial. And so really making sure that you have a clean list of your payer IDs, trying to not have duplicates, added every time somebody doesn't understand which plan a insurance is, so they add another one. That's a big issue. Really making sure that you kind of have somebody who's kind of the keeper of that payer ID list so that you can have that, minimal duplicates, have the front desk staff really understand which payer on the card it associates with. And then, of course, double checking that before claims are submitted, which is typically the billing company's rule or job. And they're the ones who are kind of double checking that that's right. But if it's put in wrong, we assume it's correct until we get that denial. And sometimes we aren't able to see that depending on the clearinghouse connection between the payer. So really important that we have a strong process in place for the front desk to understand which insurance cards and how to read them. So obviously today we've talked about 7 different ways of eligibility failures and ways in order to implement fixes. So, common pitfalls, again, are just not checking eligibility at all, especially in front of every visit, really not understanding the plans, the copays and the deductibles. Again, even if CAT coverage is active, you really want to make sure you understand as much as possible before that patient comes in, which will help your patient AR. We have just created a guide and a checklist that folks can download. We will leave the link in the show notes for you to be able to download this and help implement that. As always, this takes a lot of dedicated time for your front desk, making sure that they have that set aside every single day to get and address eligibility issues or identifying a virtual assistant or somebody who can run these before the visit, manage any inactive coverage issues, capture that patient responsibility, and help make sure that, your insurance AR is managed appropriately. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on this week and learning more about eligibility denials. Again, this is one of the number one reasons we see in our practices and that we take on. And if you can fix this, you can cut denials and increase collections a lot. All right. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.